Well, hello. Welcome to the sixth and last workshop in the winter series. It's flown by. I can't believe we've done six already and that it's March already. But anyway, it's all good. And tonight we're going to be making the last of the mustards really that we're going to do for the year, because it's just that time of the year and it's the only yes, it's mainly the only main real mustard that I make. I am going to show you another one later on, but that's not a true mustard. It's just a variation. So to recap from before, mustard's highly nutritious. The mustard seed, it's got a high level of protein in the seeds, and it's also highly antibacterial. So it's a very, very good condiment, very well behaved, and it keeps for a long time. I'll go over the history a bit more. We're going to start the cooking off first, if you're cooking along, because it has to cool down a bit. So I'll go over some more aspects of it. But the preservatives we're using in the mustard, apart from the mustard itself, and we're using mustard powder tonight, dry mustard powder that's been ground by big mechanical wheels, much like stone ground flour. It's not possible to grind mustard seeds at home to this level of fineness. So this is mustard powder, and we're going to use some honey, which again, highly antibacterial, completely stable, and that's going to be our sweetener, our sugar in there. And we're also going to use vinegar, and this one is a white. Well, no, we're not going to use it in this one, actually. We are going to use it tonight, but not in this mustard. But white wine vinegar we're going to use tonight, which we haven't used before, which, as the name suggests, comes from wine. And we have got some white wine, which we're going to use in this Dijon mustard that we're making tonight, the cooked mustard. So we've got the white wine there and the derivative vinegar there. So we're going to start off by cooking a chopped onion with some chopped garlic in the white wine. We just need one onion, 3 cloves of garlic, and 375 ml of the wine. So if we start that off and cook it, then we're going to strain out the solids, the onion and the garlic, and let it cool down a bit, and then add the other ingredients. Sometimes I leave these solids in and I put them through the food processor to obviously cut them up very, very finely so it's all smooth. I haven't compared the taste, so I rather think that it gives a stronger flavour leaving the onion and garlic in. So tonight we're going to take them out just so that I don't have another process and another noisy machine really. But if you want to leave them in and you like the flavour, then please do so. But traditionally they would be taken out. They're just there for the initial flavouring. So peel the onion if we can. Onions these days, you never seem to get the peel away from the flesh somehow. Very, very thin peel, skins on them. But peel them off and then we're going to chop them up. They don't have to be super fine or anything like that. It's not a chefy thing, this. It's just to extract the flavour. So they need to just be chopped normally. So I can get this off of here. It's all just chipping off in tiny little bits, of course. Right, that's that bit. There's that. They really become quite slippery at this stage of the game. They're sort of been in storage and so on, and they're quite, the skins get quite slippery and it's quite difficult to chop them often. If you've got a convenient machine to put them in, then do that. Take that middle bit out. It's always difficult, I think, at the end of the season before the new ones are grown and come in. Doesn't matter what kind of onion it is. And when the new shallots are around, you know, the banana shallots, I like to use them. I think they've got a sweeter, milder flavour. So if you can find those, by all means, put those in instead. I'm not making a very good job of this because they are very slippery. But it doesn't have to be pretty. Let's move the wine out of the way. Put those in the pan. And then just do the same with the garlic. You don't need to chop it finely or crush it or anything, just chop it up. And if you're leaving them in, of course, you're going to be put them through a processor anyway, so let that do the work for you. There we are. And then our white wine is 375 ml. Doesn't matter what wine you have, and it doesn't need to be expensive or anything like that. So measure out your quite conveniently. There's some left later on, but I'm not much of a white wine. There we go. Put that in with the onions and the garlic, and put that on to just simmer and cook enough to get the flavour out of it. And then we're going to strain it and then add the mustard in a moment. So, as I say, not beautifully chopped, but it doesn't matter at all. It smells lovely though. Okay. So going back over our history last week, if you remember, the Romans brought mustard really to the rest of the world. And they moved from Rome up through Europe and stopped for some time in France, or Gaul as it was then known. And the mustard makers who first learnt were in the French monasteries, and that eventually translated to the French court, of course, because anything new and anything, you know, delicious would have been centred on the court and for the great and the good to enjoy rather than the hoi polloi. But that was in around 1300s, and by the 1400s, 1450, that sort of thing, it was a staple in the French court and in daily life, because again, it was cheap, it was plentiful, And if you remember me saying about the food, although food was quite plentiful, it was quite plain because we didn't have all the food varieties that we have today. You know, we didn't have avocados and fruits from all over the world and hybrid things. It was much, much plainer. And whereas we think of these sort of condiments like mustard and minced sauce and things like that as being just a sort of just almost an afterthought to the meal, in those days it would have been a big part of it. And if you remember the banquet held by the Duke of Burgundy, they used 14 gallons of mustard cream on their banquet. You know, I mean, that's a lot, that's a lot of sauce. But it was much more integral. And in those days, everybody ate everything all together. So you would have all food on the table, a bit like a buffet today, only it would have been hot food. And people ate instinctively. So there was no sort of set courses. You would eat sweet things with savoury things, just as you wanted to. And this is really where we get things like red currant jelly with lamb and all that kind of thing. They aren't sort of a special condiment that was just made and eaten in small amounts. They would have been not made and put in jars. They would be made as a very stiff jelly set on wooden platters, the trenchers, the plates that people used. And then they would be peeled off when they were set and stacked in a cool part of the kitchen, in a still room or in the dairy, and they would be stacked up with herbs in between and then taken to the table as a whole piece of jelly and put on the table, again on a wooden plate or board, and people just cut off a slice of jelly and eat it as part of their meal, regardless whatever it was flavoured with. I mean, it was all whatever there was, and mostly it would be flavoured with herbs, either wild berries or berries that had been grown. So it was a much more, it was a plainer sort of base diet, but much more variety, and I think a much more natural way to eat. And that went on all through the Middle Ages, right up until about the 1800s. That's how people ate. We didn't have courses. We didn't have to sort of sit down and eat this before we could eat that. And we couldn't have anything sweet until we'd eaten everything. And, you know, it was much more relaxed. But I've printed something off, which I'm going to read you because it's quite complicated. And I couldn't commit it all to memory. So this demonstrates, this illustrates how things were. So we're talking here about not just family meals, although they would have been the same, but on a smaller scale, obviously. And then there would be servants maybe in the household, or not as grand as servants, but just people that helped with the work and so on. So meals would have been more kind of generally communal. But here we're talking about the bigger meals in the bigger houses and the royal court and things like that. So this was known as service à la française. It's service in the French style. It's the practice of serving various dishes of the meal at the same time, with the diners largely helping themselves from the serving dishes. That contrasts to service à la Russe, service in the Russian style, in which dishes are brought to the table sequentially and served individually, portioned by servants. So the formal dinners à la française from the Middle Ages to the 19th century, but in modern times, it's largely been supplanted by service à la Russe, as we have in restaurants. So right up to the 19th century, I mean, we tend to think that people have always eaten in the same way, and it's always been like this. But I just think how much more relaxed would a family meal be if you weren't trying to get a youngster to eat something that A, they didn't want in the first place, and B, they want to eat their pudding first? You know, I mean, if you all ate together all the time, I don't think there'd be half the battles and so on that there are. So the result of this was, there was also another style called à l'anglaise of the English service, where the hostess served out the soup at one end of the table, and later the host carving a joint of meat at the other end, serving servants taking these to the diners. But anyway, the formalised service à la française was a creation of the Baroque period, helped by the growth of published cookbooks, setting out grand dining as it was practised at the French court, which is when all this, the mustard and so on came about. As in other matters of taste and fashion, France took over from Italy as the leader of Europe, and by the 18th century, the French style was diffused across the rest of Europe, and those who could afford them hired French chefs. Over the course of the 19th century, service à la française was replaced by service à la russe in grand dining. This had the advantage of making the food much hotter when it reached the diner and reducing the huge number of dishes and condiments previously found on the table at the same time. It also ensured that everybody could taste everything they wanted, which in practice the old system often did not allow. On the other hand, the effect of magnificent profusion was reduced, and many more footmen and more tableware were required, making an option only the rich could afford. It also reduced the time spent at the table and the amount of food needed. The rest of it goes on to say that they allowed up to 4 dishes per person sat at the meal. And it meant that those 4 dishes were placed in front of you, and that might be the only thing that you got to eat, even though there might have been 80 or 90 different dishes of food on the table. They weren't passed round, and very often, if you had a big table in a court situation, the same people at the same meal would have both had an enjoyable meal, but they wouldn't have eaten the same meal. And it's really quite extraordinary and very labour intensive, of course, but I do think it's a more kind of natural way of eating, though, that you eat instinctively. And when you look at all these things that we had today that are just sort of add-ons that we don't really care whether they're there or not, just think back to their history and what they actually came from, which is you know, much more profuse sort of use. They weren't an also round, they were what brought colour and flavour to perhaps an otherwise fairly plain offering. I mean, there would have been plenty of meat, the bread would have been rough brown bread broken into chunks, that kind of thing. Not so many vegetables, lots of meat and fish, but the vegetables, until we've got all these sort of things that have come here from around the world and been hybridized and so on, it was very, very plain. There would have perhaps been sort of salad leaves and herbs, lots of herbs, and of course wine, rough wine to drink and that kind of thing. Now this isn't heating up very quickly, but we'll crack on. I think it's quite interesting. I've always felt that it was surprisingly recent as well. You know, you tend to think of it being a long time ago, but the 19th century really isn't that long. And right. Okay, so we're going to strain that through a sieve just to get out the pieces. It's always the problem doing this because the sieve is top heavy until it's got something in it. We managed to Hold that one, I'll just tip this. I'll do this left-handed when I'm not naturally left-handed. Right, okay. Put that down there a second. And then pour the wine back into the pan. So now we're going to add the dry mustard, which is 5 ounces or 125 grams, to the wine in a moment. And we're also going to blend in the honey, which is 3 tablespoonfuls of honey. Don't worry too much about doing this exactly. Honey is what honey is, and it sticks to everything. And you can try warming it up in a jug of hot water to make it less sticky, to make measuring easier, but it really isn't critical. There's no need to worry too much. There we are. So 3 tablespoonfuls of honey. Yeah, so I'm going to put this back on in a sec. Stir that in a bit. And the oil, which is 1 tablespoonful of oil. I tend not to use vegetable oil, I'm afraid, but I think olive oil is too strong a flavour for this. So I've got a rapeseed oil here, which is quite light. So that needs to go in. Put that over there. Remember, I haven't got the top on. And 2 teaspoons of sea salt. A nice crumbly sea salt, which will also help with the preservation of this. Mix that together, and then we're just going to mix in our mustard powder. There's no need to sort of fuss too much about lumps and things, because it does tend to mix really, really well, surprisingly. It's a very odd thing, but we'll just check for any obvious. Put that in, give it a good mix round. Of course, it is a starch as well, so this is what will help to thicken it. Check I've got everything in: mustard powder, honey, vegetable and sea salt. So now you need to heat it and stir it continually, and get the smooth it out as you do it. Turn the heat down. Don't want it. And you just need to cook it like any starch until it's cooked out, really. And you can see it thickens quite quickly. It smells very fruity, and that's the wine, of course. It's got a quite different smell than the other mustards that we've made, which tended to be more spicy. And that's pretty much it. I'll take that off because it's getting quite thick. I'll give it a bit more of a stir because there's one or two small lumps in there. I'm just going to bash. If you want to, you can use a whisk and just make sure it's absolutely smoothed out. And that's your cooked Dijon mustard. And Dijon, it became very famous because of the court mustard makers and the mustard makers in the monasteries, and it's still famous for this type of mustard today. Goodness knows how they got it so smooth. We heard about the cannonballs and all the rest of it last time, but it must have been tremendously hard work trying to get that sort of level of smoothness. But I suppose, if you're a servant in the royal court, you're just told to do it, and that's what you do. If you've got to throw a cannonball at some mustard seeds all day, that's your job. But I wouldn't have liked to have done it. But anyway, so we're now going to put it into the jar. I'll take this one out. Here. Use my ladle again for the main bit of it. I've got my funnel here so I don't get everything all sticky, which I'm very good at, I might say. And this will keep for a long time. It's completely shelf stable. You don't need to keep it in the fridge or anything. And experiment using it, for other things rather than just sort of on the side of the plate. You can make, you can spread it onto meat before it cooks, or you could use it in sandwiches, obviously, and things like that. Traditional use. And you could mix it with things like I make when I've got ends of sourdough loaves or something like that, I dry them and make them into seasoned breadcrumbs. I process them in the food processor with herbs and chili, things like that, and then mix it in. You could mix it with the breadcrumbs and then spread it on if you were baking some chops or something like that in the oven. And as it cools, it will thicken even more. And oops, I've got some on the side. After using my funnel. And there it is in the jar. Dijon mustard from all those hundreds of years ago, perfected by the French monks. So it's very quick to make, as you can see, as so many of these things are, and very, very delicious. And if you're making gifts for Christmas, you could make, as I've said before, the wholegrain mustards, a couple of those, and a Dijon mustard. It would make a very good gift to arrange in a box or a basket or something like that. Unusual and very, very delicious. So we're going to move on in a minute. I'll just get myself organised with what I need. Move that one. And I'm going to show you one that's another, it's not a mustard, but it's one I spoke about before, which is the Mostarda di Frutta, which is an Italian mustard pickle, really. It's in a mustard sauce, the fruit. And they make two versions, and we're going to make the kind of winter version, which is made with dried fruits. A mixture of dried fruits, and they also, which is in a mustard sauce, actually looks very much like the Dijon we just made. Or they make a summer version which uses fresh fruits, and that's in a mustard oil and is extremely hot. It's a very unusual flavour, and I do recommend it. It doesn't sound appetizing at all, I grant you, but it is absolutely delicious. It is especially good with cheeses and that kind of thing, or cold meats. And it's very Moorish, you know. Once you sort of taste it, you can't stop eating it. It's quite strange. But I've got a mixture of dried fruits in this bowl here, and we will be making it at Christmas at the end of this year, but I thought I'd just do it as we've been doing all the mustards, so I thought I'd just show you quickly now. And let me get my recipe. Now, in here, I have 300 mils of water, and you put the water in the jug first, 300 ml, and 115 grams of the mustard powder. And you soak that for an hour. Again, you put the mustard powder in the water, stir it, and it all dissolves nicely, nice and smoothly, and it's all there, ready to go. So it doesn't matter if you leave it for a bit longer than an hour, but an hour is fine. So I've got that ready. My dried fruits look a bit perhaps dull to your eyes, but they are natural dried fruits. They aren't the highly coloured dried fruits that perhaps we can get with, you know, glacé cherries and things like that. But in the bowl here, there is 115 grams or 4 ounces of dried apricots, figs, raisins, cherries, and apple rings. And they've all been chopped up into sort of just chunky bits. It's not finely chopped. You don't want to do that. It needs to be sort of chunky. And then we're going to add some stem ginger as well, which I'd forgotten to get out. And you need some sea salt, and that's about it. So we've got some, where's my sugar? There's 115 grams of brown sugar, which I'm going to put in my pan. It's just soft brown, light brown sugar. You don't want anything too dark, you know, otherwise it would just make the mustard go very, very dark. So just a light brown, soft sugar there. Oh, this mustard's making my nose run. And then I've got my white wine vinegar, which I very enthusiastically started talking about earlier, made from white wine, fermented, and it's a nice light taste. You don't, again, want anything too strong overtaking the flavours of the fruits. It's just delicious. So this is a very good case in point of matching the vinegar to the ingredients. All vinegars, if they are called vinegar, are the same in terms of their powers of preservation and so on, but the flavours will make a difference. You wouldn't want a red wine vinegar or a balsamic vinegar or a malt vinegar. The white wine vinegar is just perfect. So we're going to put that in the pan with the sugar. And then we just need to heat that to dissolve the sugar. Let's get my spoon again. And you need to dissolve the sugar, otherwise you don't want it crystallizing later on because it's not dissolved properly. But it won't take very long. You need to stir it. As I've said before, you can hear sugar in the pan if I stop talking. And you can see it at the moment. But once that smooths out in the heat, then it will be fine. Because if you add everything else and then it hasn't dissolved properly, sugar is a crystal and crystals grow. That's what they do. So you will get sort of chunky, crunchy bits in your preserves, whether it's a pickle or a jam or whatever, and you don't want that. It's not dangerous, it won't hurt you, but it's not very nice at all. So we'll keep going. Hi Karis, welcome. So there, if you listen now. All that sort of gritty noise is gone. And you just need to check around the sort of edges of the bowl to make sure that the pan, to make sure that it's all, you haven't left anything in the folds there. You just need to bring it up to the boil.
In the middle.
Hmm?
Get in the middle. Okay.
Which I'll do now. Just, it's nearly there anyway. I need to take my own advice and not keep stirring it while it's coming up to the boil, because the more you stir things, the more they cool down. Poor Trev's holding the camera here and he's gasping for air in all the vinegar fumes. But anyway, so when that's come up to the boil, we're going to put in the fruit, and we need to put in our salt, which is another part of our preservation, food preservation. Another preservative. As we know, you've got the three natural preservatives: salt, sugar and vinegar, and you've got them all in this preparation. So we've got the Holy Trinity, as it were. And I'm also going to be adding our pieces of stem ginger, which will need to be chopped. So I'm just going to get those out ready. And stem ginger is something we're going to be making in the next series. In the spring term, we'll be making stem ginger. This is one I bought earlier because the one I made has gone off for the photography to be done for the classes and so on, you know, when we're putting them on the website. So I haven't got my big jar that I made. I have made it before, but it's not something I make all the time. So it just depends whether I've got any or not. So it's all come up to the boil there. And what we're going to do now is to take it off of the heat and put it down. And we're going to add our salt, which is 1 teaspoon. Heaped, as you know, I like sort of a heat anything really. Stir that in. Then we put in all of our fruit, and this is where I find some at the bottom that I haven't chopped up properly. Not too bad. There we are. Mix that round a bit. And of course, this will swell up in the when it's in the jar. It will reabsorb liquid, and it will all become quite plump and soft. I think dried anything never looks particularly promising, but and this is our mustard mix, just the mustard powder and the water, and that goes in now as well. And give that a mix round. And I'm also going to just chop up my ginger a little less chunky than the dried fruit is, because sometimes finding a big chunk of ginger can be a bit challenging. So I'll cut it up a bit more finely. But those of you that love ginger probably wouldn't mind, but it's sometimes a bit of a shock. Just slips about in all the syrup that it's jarred in, so it's a bit tricky. I didn't forget this. I don't know why, but it always tells you to do all this other first and then put the ginger in last. And I've never understood why that is, why it can't be sort of prepped and done with all the rest of the fruit. I don't know, but I've just stuck to what I've always done. So I should just go mad and put it all in at the beginning, shouldn't I? Because I can't see that it would make any difference to the end result, but never mind. So that's about, you know, okay for fineness. I'm going to put that in there, and I'll give it a stir when I've put my sticky mat down and wash my hands. Stir the ginger in so that it's evenly mixed, and then we're going to put it back on the heat. Won't need it quite as high as it was, and we're just going to stir it until it's evenly cooked out. As I said, mustard is a starch, and like all starches, once it heats up, the starch molecules burst and thicken the mixture. Now Trev's got to contend with the mustard fumes instead of vinegar fumes. You do get used to it, you know, the more you do, the more you sort of, the less it affects you. It's like chopping onions, you know, if you do them regularly, they cease to affect your eyes and that kind of thing. Now the Italians would, of course, you know, they would make it with all sorts of dried fruits. They might have dried peaches or pears, that kind of thing, because they probably make their own from the fruits in their garden, and they dry them probably in the sun so that they would just be really delicious. But you can mix and match, you know, you don't have to use exactly the same fruits as I have, and use what you have or what you like. You can see this heating up. heat up a bit more so that I'm stirring it madly and it's not thickening. You can see it bubbling now. It doesn't need to be too thick, because in the jar, as I said, the fruits are going to soak up that juice and get sort of climmed up, my mother would say, but I'm told that there's no such word. But that's what we always used to say when things plumped up again from doing this kind of thing. Again, if you get some nice sort of exuberant looking jars, this makes a great gift for people, especially at Christmas, you know, because they probably haven't eaten it unless they've eaten it in Italy. It's not the sort of thing you see on deli shelves and so on in this country, and I just don't know why, really. So if you're planning on being an artisan producer, or maybe you're already an artisan producer, it would be a good one to bring into your products that you sell, because it would be unusual. Right. I'm feeling quite pleased because I did dry those apples myself, and usually I sell a lot in the autumn and the winter to people coming into my little shop, but of course it's been shut. And I thought, whatever am I going to do with all those dried apples? Because we've got every kind of apple in this house, preserved in every way possible, because we've got apple trees. So, you know, you do get a bit stuck with how to use things up when there's just the two of you. So there's our mixture, and then it goes in the jar, obviously, and it needs to be in there for, really, this is one that you need to keep for a couple of months, because it needs to absorb and develop all those flavors. So I'll just do a couple of jars for now. I'll get rid of my spoon again. So you know, make it and leave it, and then it's a nice treat. You can see all the fat raisins in there and bits of fig. Make sure you get some of the juice in. It's a bit of a, it's like making piccalilli. It's a bit of a job actually getting it into the jar through the spout. I use this spoon to sort of give it a poke. Push it down as you go. Just get the air bubbles out. You don't want air trapped in the jar if you can possibly help it, because that's where, you know, you might get yeasts and things trapped and multiplying. But with all that salt and vinegar and honey in there, I wouldn't, and the mustard, I don't think you'd stand much of a chance really with any bugs, but that's the idea anyway. So we get to this point, and what you need to do is get that under the juice to make sure that it doesn't dry or anything. So fill the jar right to the top, put some more in, and then with anything like this, I've done it with the mincemeat and other things when we made that, is you just push with the back of the spoon and any juice will come up over the top, and make sure that everything is submerged. And that's the easiest way to do it. And you've got to, when you're jarring things like this, you've got to sort of even out the juice, because you don't want to use it all in the first jar and then have nothing left for the end of the pan. So if we put the top on there, And then you can see in the jar, it all looks all sort of interesting. You wouldn't know what that was if you hadn't had it before. It would be quite intriguing, I think. I'm just going to do one more, and then I can do the rest in a minute when we're I hope we're not going to return to mustard through the rest of the year, you might be relieved to know, but it is the ideal time to learn these things when there's sort of not a lot of fresh produce around. But I hope you'll try them, and once you get used to the methods, make up your own, you know, just think, oh, I like that and I like this, and just try it out and be more instinctive. You don't have to use a recipe. The people that learnt how to preserve food didn't start with recipes. They started with what they had and what they'd learnt. And you can do the same. Some things you'll like, some things you won't, but you learn from that. And even if you don't like it, you can either give it away if it's edible, but you just don't like it, or you can save it and mix it with something else later that might alter the taste. You know, you might sort of think, oh, well, that might be nice with that. You can always put it back in the pan and heat it up if it's a cooked product. So and mustards are a very good thing to learn to experiment with. Tracy's asking, how long does mustard powder generally keep for? It is a flour essentially, so you've got to keep it in a good, you know, container, because all flours are subject to kind of deterioration, shall we say, if they get too old. But I wouldn't keep it for sort of longer than a year really, although it will probably be fine, but the flavour might diminish, and also it just might not be very nice. So if you can, you know, buy. You can buy it online in bigger packets than in a supermarket. So look at some of the spice companies. You could buy a kilo, and that would be plenty for making, you know, some of these for a year. And seeds. I mean, we sell the mustard seeds on Lovejar's website because they are difficult to get in bulk unless you're near an Asian or an Indian market, and then you'll probably be able to pick them up there. But if you can't, we sell them by the kilo online and just send them out, because we know that it is difficult to find. So just sort of keep common sense really, keep them dry, keep the mustard powder out of the light. It's the same with things like turmeric and ginger and so on. They will deteriorate if they get sunlight on them, and you might not think it's sunlight, but any light will make them lose colour and, you know, kind of the power of their flavour. But that's, I think, a very interesting one, and we will be, as I say, making it later in the year from scratch, like I've done tonight. But I thought I would just show you to round off the mustard sort of season, as it were. And we're going to look forward now to the next term. I've got some homework for you in the 4 weeks holiday. Our new magazine is out. It's online digitally, or it will be by tomorrow. You can read it in page turning software. It's easy just to read and turn the pages, so you can grab a cup of coffee and you can dip into it. There's no adverts. It's all packed with information, and this month's is all about eggs and how to keep them, how to use them, where to get them. We've got our mustard balls in there, is one of our recipes, and then there's all sorts of things about hens and eggs and recipes, and dehydrating eggs. We're going to be learning about dehydrating food next season. I think it's the second or I'm not sure which class it is, but anyway, we won't be making anything that night. That will be me showing you a lot of the possibilities. I wouldn't be able to show you all of them because there's too many. But things like drying your own egg to use, there's all sorts of recipes there, fun things to do, and then bits about the other things that we do on Love Jars, the frozen food company there. So there's 16 issues now, and they're all there to read for free online. We do print a few which go out in some of the subscription box orders that we do, and you can request a printed one if you prefer. You can order that online. The other thing I'd like to sort of draw your attention to, it's a bit heavy, I admit that, but it is a vital read, I think, if you're, I won't say into food, because I don't consider what we do is on a par with the food programs and so on, where you're doing sort of what we were hearing about tonight, the 3 courses or 4 courses, and it's all, you know, it's beautifully done and everything like that. This is the science of food. And if you get Joanna Blytheman's book, that's Trevor will probably put a link up for you in a minute, and it's called Swallow This. And this is about the food industry, processed food, the additives, the sugars, all the things that are added to our food. Some things that we have as a processed food, either meal or ingredient, aren't actually food. They're not even made out of food. There's so many chemicals and so many, and it's a very valuable read, and will make you or help you to evaluate what's important, whether it's just doing a little bit of prep and making some things that are delicious and you know where they've come from and what's in them, or whether you go for speed and convenience. And if you do go for speed and convenience, choosing the right thing, because there are ready meals and so on out there which don't have this kind of thing in them. It's heavy going to start with, but it does get easier to read, but it's also terrifying. And I think really it should be compulsory reading for all school children to, you know, in 6th form or something like that, in their latter years in school, to arm them for the world around them, because it's really quite fictional, the food world, and it's very, very hard to make the right decisions. And we'd be so much healthier if we didn't go for the highly processed foods and the artificial sugars and so on. So we'll put up the ISBN number. I don't get anything for promoting it or anything like that. It was just one of the life-changing reads that I read. And I knew it was bad, but I didn't know how bad until I read this book. And she's written a whole series of different things on different subjects. And I think really before you start getting into all the, you know, the lovely artistry of food, you need the building blocks. You need to know of where it's come from, how it's been reared, if it's an animal food, how it's been produced if it isn't, what's in it, and really you end up rejecting all of it, I've found, you know, quite easily. It's not a difficult decision, and that's what I'm about. Now, next term, we're going to be, the first one is making a brown sauce. It's called Everyday Brown Sauce, and that's exactly what it is. And it tastes exactly like the, what should I say, market leader, perhaps, although probably now it's an own brand that people buy. But the one that you most commonly think of when you think of brown sauce, this tastes exactly like that. And it's basically made from cabbage, so happy days. And then we're going to be doing the preserved ginger, the dehydrating, and the magazine from now on. Each month, it comes out each month, we write it and produce it, and it's always sort of seasonally topical, and other people put articles in. If any of you ever want to write for it, you can. But we will have a dehydrating section in there. So every month there'll be something about dehydrating food, because that is an area that I think is not talked about, but is very, very useful. And especially if you travel, if you go camping or caravanning or sailing, walking, all that kind of thing, you can prepare your own food at home. You can dehydrate it, you can take it with you. It's light to carry, convenient, and then you can just rehydrate it wherever you are, and it's completely shelf stable. And there's lots and lots of things that you can do. So we'll be including a section in the magazine each month that covers dehydrating. We're going to be making some blackcurrant jam. It doesn't have to be blackcurrant, but I'm making blackcurrant. But we'll be finally learning how to make jam, which is probably the most ubiquitous thing people say, you know, oh, you're the jam lady. Oh, you know, I'd love to know how to make jam. But I think you're discovering there's a whole lot more to this than making jam. But it is an important process to learn, and we'll be doing that in the next series, all ready for when all the lovely berries come along just a little bit later on. So have a look online if you want to book up for another series. That we'd be very, very pleased if you did. I hope you've enjoyed this one and you've learned some things that perhaps you've incorporated into your preserving way of life, and it's made you think, and it's been I hope, a happy revelation that it's not hard work, it doesn't take very long, and it's easily done with everyday ingredients. So have a good break, enjoy Easter, and I'll see you again in 4 weeks, hopefully.